Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're back in War Thunder looking at a new vehicle from update 1.77, and this is the Ki-108. It is a twin-engined intercept fighter, I suppose is what you would call it. Gaijin themselves just call it a heavy fighter, and it is a rank 3 battle rating 4.0. You'll find it in the tree here, just before the Ki-109, and just after the Ki-102 Otsu. So what makes this thing stand out compared to some of the other heavy fighters that the Japanese have? Well, it has this great stonking 37mm on it, and you may be saying, well, everything else in the Japanese tree has a large gun on it when we look at the heavy fighters. Well, this is slightly different. Twinned with two 20mm HO5 guns, the HO4 37mm has a fire rate of around about 400 rounds per minute. Now, since it has a clip size of about 35, that pretty much means that you can throw all of these rounds out in less than 10 seconds. All of the other bigger guns that the Japanese have, they have quite a low fire rate on them. Well, this 37 is able to go through its clip pretty quickly, which is kind of interesting. At the same time, it is made of fuel tanks near the engines, as you can see. They are all self-sealing, of course, which is kind of nice. And the engines themselves are some Nakajima HA112 2RU 14-cylinder radials. They have a lot of power behind them, 1500 in total when it comes to takeoff power. But they're also surrounded by a very large oil cooling system, and also one at the bottom here, meaning that if they get hit at all, they will die incredibly quickly by either the fuel just all falling out and setting on fire, or the oil all falling out and the engine just, well, basically seizing itself to death. It is a fast aircraft though, as long as you look at the stat card, and there is only a little bit of armor on it. As you can see, 12mm behind the pilots, nothing on the wings, nothing on the engines, which is definitely an issue, being a fighter which is supposed to annihilate bombers. Remember, the majority of bombers have those wonderful turrets on them trying to kill you. So the first thing to look at on modifications is this machine does not get an upgraded belt for the 37, so this is what you get. It is a Heffy T round, high explosive fragmentation incendiary tracer shell, and one of the issues with it is as you can see, the penetration there. It does do a lot of damage if it penetrates, but 2mm is not high penetration, meaning that a lot of the time, if you are shooting anything with a little bit of armor on it, you're going to see a lot of poofs of hits and poofs of smoke and stuff like that, and what will happen is it won't do anything, or at least it will only yellow the aircraft instead of annihilating it. From a 37, what you want is it to just decimate a target that you hit, but unfortunately this 37 is not one of those things. You do get upgraded belts on the 20mm though, and I've personally been trying to work out which are the best ones for this. One of the annoying things is the fact that these muzzle velocities between the two guns are slightly different. So if you're trying to go at range against an enemy bomber, it is much better to actually use, the 37 and the 20 individually instead of together. And I understand it is quite similar. Like if you look at this tracer shell, you're looking at 702 meters per second, and it's 710 meters per second, but it does make a slight difference at ranges over 1 kilometer. So you start off with a default belt of Heffy P APT, which isn't awful, but then you have to graduate to whatever you believe is correct. For me personally, what I like is the universal, the 2 Heffy and the APT. That has worked for me over the time that I've used this machine, but I also tried out ground targets for that extra penetration, and what I found was I was putting a lot of holes in a lot of things, but it wasn't doing a lot of damage. Sometimes stealth is also ran. I just wish that it didn't have that practice shell, but with 400 rounds of ammunition, you do have quite a lot, so using Heffy I think is completely fine. Talking about flight performance and survivability, which one is the most important? Well, it seems like no matter what upgrades you get, the issues that the Ki-108 has with survivability don't go away, and we'll get into that in the gameplay portion. but therefore, I think it is right to get the flight performance stuff. On the land maps, you will actually spawn on the airfield. You don't get an air spawn, so you need to be able to climb, and this thing does climb really well, but you still would want to get these flight performance upgrades to be able to climb even better. So get all of these, and get the offensive 20mm as quick as possible. And so you get fuselage, radiator, offensive 20mm, then compressor, airframe, wings, repair, engine injection cover, and then the last 37mm upgrade here at rank 3. That is basically what I did. It worked out for me in a decent sense. There was definitely some issues early on against other single engine fighters, but as it went along, when I got the modifications, it felt a hell of a lot better to actually use this thing. It doesn't get any other camos, so what you see is what you get, which is kind of sad, and also it does share the BR with some other aircraft. So the J2M2 is at 4.0, the A6 M3 Mod 22 is at 4.0, and the Ki-108 Otsu Hayabusa is also at 4.0. So you have some stiff competition to go up against, we'll say, when it comes to which plane to pick. But anyway, we're going to do a history section for this aircraft, and then after that we'll get into some gameplay. In order to talk about the Ki-108, we have to start with the Ki-102 heavy fighter, which was introduced late in the Pacific War by the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service. There was 238 of the type built before the end came in 1945 for Japan. Intended as a successor for the Ki-45 Toryu, this twin-engined, two-seat system provided a long-range reach for ground forces, and 3 major variants were planned, including a dedicated night fighter. Ki-102s would go on to see only limited action in the conflict, because they were reserved for homeland defense, just like a lot of the new Japanese technology that they created later war. And this meant that it made very little impact on the outcome of the war. Its allied reporting name was actually Randy, which is kind of interesting. But from the design of the 102 was to come another planned offshoot of a heavy fighter, and this was the Ki-108. It was a high-altitude/heavy fighter interceptor, and the form was drawn up along the lines of a high-altitude fighter capable of meeting the new B-29 Superfortress. So this thing was designed to go after B-29s, making their presence known over Japan. So the B-29s at the time pretty much had free reign over Japan, and Japan needed to create some vehicles in the form of planes which could actually deal with them, so they don't just go unattacked and they're able to bomb at will. So 2 Ki-102B model series aircraft were set aside for the Ki-108's development phase. The Ki-102B was given some improvements enacted in the Ki-102C night fighter, primarily the lengthened fuselage. The dimensions included a length of 38.4 feet, a height of 12 feet, and a span of 51.4 feet. So unlike the Ki-102, and more like the Ki-96, the 108 was slated to carry just 1 crew member instead of 2. And the primary role of it would lay in high-altitude interception. A pressurized cabin became a default requirement, as did high-altitude performance. It was also supposed to carry 1 37mm HO-203 cannon in the nose and 2 20mm HO-5s buried under the cockpit floor. So obviously in game, the 37mm the 108 has is the 204 variant, so we'll see where that comes into it. So the engine choice was the ones that I described in the hangar, and it was turbo supercharged, air-cooled radials, and they were fitted on the wing's leading edge. They straddled the slim fuselage, 1500 horsepower maximum during takeoffs, and around about 1000 at 32,000 feet. The estimated performance specifications also included a maximum speed of 360 miles per hour and about a 44,300 service ceiling feet. and a range of around about 1,120 miles. So the Ki-108's design, even though it came from the Ki-102, it was also based on another Kawasaki heavy fighter project, a single-seat twin-engine form being developed by the Kawasaki Corporation, whatever you want to call it, the Ki-96. This model had been in the works since around about 1942 in the summer, and seemed to fit the new IJA requirements rather well, so it was pushed forward with some of the qualities of the Ki-102 to make an all-new aircraft. The Ki-96 was another intended successor to the Ki-45, but it failed in this respect, with only 3 prototypes being realized of the project. So with that all in mind, the Ki-108 became something of a culmination of both the 102 and the 96. The 102 borrowing the wings and tail of its progenitor, though the 108 given an all-new tail unit on it. Its cockpit would be hermetically sealed and feature a double-glazed canopy, so as not to require the engines to produce the needed compressed air. Work on the 108 in 1944, which yielded a prototype for July in rather short order, and a second one followed that August. Flight trials were conducted without the intended superchargers, so they tried it in a weakened state, but at least they tried it. And this is why the cockpit is so weird in the 108. They had to create a pressured environment, but they didn't want to do it in the conventional method. Also, beyond the actual 108 itself, you had the 108 Kai, which was given a longer fuselage and wider spanning wing mainplanes, which was also introduced with the Ki-102 High, and these were changes meant to improve high altitude handling and performance, so 2 additional prototypes were contracted for, and the first arrived in the March of 1945. Then a second aircraft came in May, but the pair simply could not evolve fast enough for Japan's unfortunate time at that time in the war, and the flight trials ended prematurely with the conclusion of the Pacific War in August 1945. So the Ki-108 Kai improved upon overall speed and also the range of the machine. So the 4 aircraft that were actually to come from the Ki-108, all of the prototypes, its design was never truly finalized, and its combat potential also remained unfulfilled. So pretty much reading about this machine, the main differences that you may see between this and what we have in game is the fact that its 37mm is different. Now the reason for that is because the 204 cannon first of all would up the BR of the 108, which is why it's different to the 102, but at the same time it was going through testing. So why not go for a plane which is also going through testing, and because it was never finalized, you can stick a different gun on it. That seems to be basically what Gaijin did in this situation. But overall, another Japanese plane which was never truly created, and even though it may have been a noble cause to actually create something to try and go after B-29s, another failed project which never was able to do so. Let's get on to some gameplay. Every time I play a heavy fighter from Japan, I pretty much get the same impression of it. For a twin-engine heavy fighter, it is incredibly good, incredibly maneuverable. The guns are good enough to take on other fighters, other bombers, not so much, but pretty much other fighters. It has good climb rate, it feels nice to fly as a twin-engine fighter, but how does it stack up against the other planes which you can fly at the same BR? There is only one so far in the twin-engine Japanese tree that I would argue is superior to some of its single-engine counterparts, and this is the Ki-45 Co, just because of its insane maneuverability for its size and also power from the engines. The Ki-108 is no different through my thinking, so we have to compare it to the Ki-43.3 Otsu, the A6M3 Mod 22, and of course the J2M2. Now, against the J2M2, there is no competition. The J2M2 is a much better energy fighter and a much nicer plane to fly, than the Ki-108. It has, in my opinion, a better armament, because the 7.7s are more useful than the 37, and also it climbs better, it turns better, and the overall feel of it is much better. The A6M3 Mod 22, even though it doesn't stack up too well if it gets up-tiered into stuff like P47Ns and of course the P51, it also has a nice feel to it. The A6M3 Mod 22 has an amazing energy retention in the turn and is also able to climb well. The only real issue it has is dive speed, which is where the Ki-108 beats it. So even in that scenario, I would believe the A6M3 Mod 22 comes out on top as long as you're facing average players instead of more experienced players who know how to take you apart. The Ki-108 Otsu is the only one which I would say the Ki-108 actually fully beats out. With only 220mm and also no real dive speed and only turning that it has at 4.0, you can defensively fly for days and hope that the enemy misses, but eventually somebody is going to connect one shot and your Ki-108 Otsu Hayabusa is going to burst into flames and die. So the Ki-108, in my opinion, does have the actual edge over that one. So overall, there are already planes that are better than it in the tree at the same BR, meaning that taking out the Ki-108 you would have to do for a specific reason. And the specific reason would be the armaments. The 37mm 204 that you find on the Ki-108 is a gun which is incredibly good at fire rate and at killing fighters. What it is terrible at is killing bombers. You can plant tons of shots into PBJs, into B-25s, into stuff like Yurs if you ever face them, and it won't do a lot because it can't penetrate the armor that they have on those machines. But against fighters, if you connect a round or two, the 37 will annihilate part of that aircraft, meaning that it can't do anything, and you can easily just finish it off with the 20s. It is nice to have the 220s as backup to finish off a target, but still, with the ammunition choices that you get on the 20s, it does feel like they are inferior to a lot of the other 20s that you get on the same BR vehicles, such as the Type 99 Mark 1s and the Type 99 Mark 2s on the J2M2. There is no question that on the J2M2, if you look at the belts of the 20mm, they are just much more useful to you than the belts of the Ki-108's H05 guns, which are present on the Ki-108 Otsu. But on top of that, what do you get out of the Ki-108 is a massively maneuverable heavy fighter with good energy retention, but still worse than its single-engine counterpart. So why would you take this thing? That is the overall message of this and pretty much every twin-engine fighter when it comes to the Japanese, with a few exceptions. There are also a few other issues. Earlier on this week, I made a compilation of stream highlights of the Ki-108 setting fire. I died a total of 12 times on that stream, and 9 of those times were to fires. And it wasn't just general fires, it was fires after getting hit once, and then the fire going out, and then getting finished off by somebody else because I was heavily damaged from that fire. It is nice that the fires pretty much always go out in the Ki-108. What is not nice is the fact that you have a machine which will always set on fire. Self-sealing fuel tanks are wonderful if they have some armor in the first place, and therefore don't always set on fire, but the Ki-108 struggles in that department. And when you're facing B-25s, PBJs on a regular basis, which have a lot of 50 cals at a lot of different angles, especially the ones that you will generally attack, you're gonna get set on fire. Even from the front, even from above, even from below. Something will set you on fire, and it will be incredibly annoying because it pretty much takes you out of the match for a long time if you're able to get back to the airfield. And if you're not, well, you're pretty much, dead you're pretty much dead from that point anyway. The 37mm is underwhelming when it comes to killing bombers, which I've already talked about, but something that does actually come into its favor it has a very low repair cost. Its max repair cost is 3,493 silver lions when it's fully upgraded. If we compare that to some of its compatriots, the Ki-43 Otsu, not fully upgraded, 7,000. J2M2, 7,000 or 6,700, and the Mod 22 Ryzen, 8,690. So this thing is about half the price of the cheapest single-engine fighter that you get. So this can be a moneymaker for you. As long as you pick up an assist or a kill in a battle, you will make silver lions. So there is that to look for as a massive positive. It also has very good high speed. It is able to go around 750 kilometers an hour in a dive, which is very impressive, especially when sometimes, being at 4.0, you get uptiered into 4.7 and have to face machines like the P-47N, which can dive faster than that, but it's still nice to be able to dive at 750 compared to all the other planes, where the J2M2 is probably the only one which can get up around there. At the same time, when we talk about the high speed though, its maneuverability kind of goes out the window. One of the reasons why these twin-engine heavy fighters from Japan are incredibly good is because of their elevator. The elevator is what forces the aircraft around, and if you see a lot of the bombers from many of the nations, the big 4-engine bombers, what you will find is, if they have a massive elevator, this is what makes them be able to flip around in game. The Ki-108 is no different. The elevator is huge, meaning that turning with single-engine fighters is something you can actually do. But at high speeds, where you're supposed to be high-altitude, high-speed fighter, this isn't the case. What generally will happen is you will not lock up, but to be able to get guns on target is incredibly hard to do. It also has what I like to call P-38 syndrome. When Rex and I used to play the P-38 a lot, what would happen is someone would hit your wingtip and your wingtip would set on fire. Now, the P-38 doesn't have any fuel, it doesn't have any ammo, it doesn't have anything in that outer wing which would make it set on fire, but it still did it. And the Ki-108 is the same way. If you hit the edge of the wing, where the fuel tanks are not, they are much more near the fuselage, it can set on fire, for no apparent reason. I think there definitely is an issue here with the damage model of the Ki-108, and I hope it gets addressed in future patches. It also gets an airfield spawn, which, even though the climb rate is good on the Ki-108, it means that every other fighter around its BR is able to outclimb it, just by being a single-engine fighter. The only one which won't outclimb it is the Ki-61 that absolutely nobody uses. So yeah, that's pretty much it with that. It isn't nice that it has an airfield spawn, but since a lot of maps for Japan you spawn in the air anyway because they're carrier maps or sea maps, generally you won't notice this, but on something like Zhengzhou, when you actually have to climb towards the enemy, you will find yourself at a disadvantage a lot of the time. And also, as a last little thing for the Ki-108, the engines, I've never met more temperamental engines in my life, and this is from stock, Ki-108 to fully upgraded. If you WEP, your engines will start dying within 5 minutes. If you're at 100%, your engines will start dying at about 5 minutes 10. If you knock it back to 90, the engines won't cool down. You have to knock it back to around about 85 for them to start cooling down. And then once you spool them back up, they will start overheating again. This thing is pretty much combat effective at 85 to 90% thrusters, but you need that 100% and also war emergency power in order to counteract the speed of a lot of other single-engine fighters that you're going to be fighting. So a lot of the times, if you're in an elongated battle with some single-engine fighters, you will bleed out your engines, and you will have to make sure that you're watching the indicators in the top left so your engines don't annihilate themselves. This has been something I've done quite a few times, where I've been turning with a single-engine fighter, I've been out turning it, I've been trying to get my guns on target, been getting pretty close every time, and then after about 4 minutes not looking at my engine temperatures, my engines just decide to die because I've been at 100% the whole time. But if you knock it back to 80, you can't run, and at the same time you can't turn with the enemy. So in that situation, you're pretty much boned. So if you can't kill an enemy quickly, get the hell out of there, because you're going to have to cool the engines pretty quickly in this machine. So that's pretty much the last point I have on the Ki-108. I have had fun flying it, because it is always fun having a large gun annihilate some enemy which is coming in on you. I just wish that the plane itself was not a twin-engine fighter. Because if it was like a single-engine fighter, and it had this variety of guns, I think it would be incredibly fun. But because of its large size, because of its many fire issues, because of its overheating, it isn't that fun to fly for me. And I would just always recommend the J2M2 over it. But I hope you all have a wonderful day. And of course, thank you for watching.